Hello again. As we look at Daniel chapter 3, I want to start with a question. Do you recall the hymn, Faith of Our Fathers? In that, there's a verse about we should be true in spite of dungeon, fire, and sword, and how sweet would be their children's fate if they like them could die for thee. We all get to die once. The question is, how will that be? Can I die faithful or not? And so we're looking here at an example of in spite of dungeon, fire, and sword here with Daniel's three friends in Daniel chapter 3. So let's jump right into it here. In this third chapter, we start out with King Nebuchadnezzar still, and he made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now the pedestal for this, they think they found recently southeast of Babylon, where Babylon was, and so here is the reality of where the statue might have stood. Try to imagine, if you will, if it was just thin as aluminum foil, how much gold it would have taken to put around a statue 9 stories tall and 9 feet wide. The question we might ask is, why did Nebuchadnezzar have all this work done? Was this supposed to be a new god of his? They had lots of gods there. Or was he supposed to be the image that was of that statue, and he wanted people to be worshiping him? We don't get that answer from here. But we do have one comment here. It was in the province of Babylon, not in the city of Babylon. There's a question you should have asked yourself, maybe you never have. How come Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego are to get thrown in the furnace, and Daniel was not? Well, the reason is because it didn't happen in the city. It happened out in the province, in the rural area, that this was occurring. So we have the plain of Dura, which you can find in encyclopedias or whatever, and the province of Babylon. And here's the statue, 9 stories tall on a pedestal. It would have been easy to see this from most anywhere around, which I think was part of the idea. So you got something here that is going to be demanded that you worship, and that people could have seen for miles and miles away. So kind of like one of these great figures from the great king Nebuchadnezzar. So he summons then his satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, and magistrates. All the provincial officials have to come to the dedication of this statue. Right? This is orders. If you're in a government service, you're coming, and you're going to be there for this. So when they all got together, then it was assembled there. They see the image, and they stood before it because they were ordered to come. Now, then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you're commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Here's a command of your king. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to like it. You just have to do it. You get 2 choices. You either fall down and worship that image, or be thrown into a blazing furnace, and you're cremated alive. So this is what happens then. They're all going to have to do it. And the question is that are these people cowards that they won't stand up for the faith and say, wait a minute, this is stupid? Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They were afraid, weren't they? They were afraid, I don't want to be burned at a fiery furnace here. So what the heck, I'll worship one more god. I got a bunch of them anyway. If it's going to make Nebuchadnezzar happy, I'll bow before his thing and do what everybody else in the crowd is doing. Now, at this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You've issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace." See, we were listening when the herald announced all this. This is what you commanded. It was a decree. And so that's what you said. And these astrologers are part of the entourage around the king. They like their job. They don't like that they got bumped down when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego got promoted here in the last chapter. But there are some Jews whom you set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, who pay no attention to you, O king, neither serve your gods. They don't do that. They don't worship the image of gold you set up. These guys won't do it. Now, that would probably be true of any faithful Jew as well, but the ones they want to get rid of are the ones who are in line ahead of them in positions of importance. I don't think this was some kind of religious zeal. Because if they had their own religious zeal over their God and religion, they wouldn't be bowing down to some other one either. So it tends to look like political jealousy. I'll make no comments about things how today are where we have political jealousy in America and all over the world. You can work on that yourself. All right, so they've just accused them. These guys don't do what was commanded. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, so these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I set up?" Yeah? Remember, they were accused. They don't pay attention to you, O king. Is this true? Aren't you going to worship my image here? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flutes, the lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you are ready. If you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? I'm telling you what's going to happen. This is your last chance, he's telling them. Are you going to do what you're told, or are you going to be stubborn about this? And so we see the response of faithful men. All right? The question at hand that he asked them is, what God will be able to rescue you from my blazing fiery furnace? Their response. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you on this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you set up." These are faithful Jews. Remember from Exodus and the Ten Commandments, you shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make graven images. God is commanding this, and now the king's commanding something else. What will you do when one command seems to be opposed to the other? But let's get one fact straight. They're saying, my God can save me, and he will rescue us from your hand. Maybe he does that by seeing us fry in that furnace, or maybe he does that by some miracle. But either way, we're not going to do what we know to be wrong. Faith of our fathers, holy faith. We will be true to thee till death. So that's their defiant answer. You're wrong. There is a God who can save, and we worship him. We're not going to change. Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, and his attitude toward them changed. Remember, he had been friendly towards them because of Daniel. And so he promotes them at Daniel's request. They're elevated to a position of authority, and so he's accepted them. Now his attitude changes. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. So I don't think we're talking about some thermostat that they got there. They probably worked this furnace, like with a lot of blacksmith shops, with bellows. And maybe they just increased the number or speed that they were putting the air into the furnace to make the furnace hotter than usual. And he commanded, this is the king, commanded that some of the strongest soldiers in his army tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego and throw them in the furnace. So somebody's got to get close to this. Now, I want you to pause for a minute and think about this fire, this furnace here. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but there was a big enough opening for people to be thrown into it, and there was somewhere nearby where the king could be seated and watching the proceedings. But it's going to be some distance away. If you have ever been nearby when a house was on fire or something like that, a forest fire or something, you know that the heat can be intense from a distance away. So some people who have an aversion to being burned in a fire are going to say, I don't want to help. So he looks for some of his strongest, most loyal soldiers. He says, okay, I'm going to pick you guys. Go and tie these guys up, walk them up there, get close enough to throw them in. That's their command. And so they're going to obey because they don't want to be thrown in themselves, right? So these men, wearing their robes, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown. We're talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. They're dressed in the robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, and they were bound, and they were thrown into the furnace. Notice they're wearing Babylonian-style clothes, not Jewish-style clothes. But they have been taken into captivity. They're now living under this kind of a culture, so they have, for their jobs, they dress like they were ordered to by the king and by the culture. And so that much they did. So they're dressed in trousers and turbans, and not just some kind of a Jewish robe. So they're bound as the soldiers take them close enough and toss them in, or close enough where they're going to fall in. Next verse 22 says, the king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot, the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, and these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. So there's a falling involved here, but there's also something else outside. As we get close enough, try to imagine these soldiers, perhaps wearing their iron, and they're pushing these men forward, and the heat is intense. And if they're wearing armor, they start to get baked inside their armor. And so they're dying of heat themselves, but manage to get them close enough where our three faithful friends are going to be falling into the furnace with their clothes on, ready to start on fire, with their arms bound, and so they're in there. Now I get the scene here. I kind of like this art picture here because you got the king kind of ready to stand up from where his chair was. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? Weren't there 3 of them? And it says the advisors calmly replied, let's see, Shadrach, Meshach, Abed-Nego, 1, 2. Yep, there were 3. Certainly, O king. There were 3. Of course there were. What do you think? So he's looking in there, and they will be looking as well. And what does he see? He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed. And the 4th one looks like the son of the gods. All right, we throw 3 men in, tied up. They're not tied anymore, and they're not 3 anymore. They're walking around like they're having a good time with somebody else there who looks like nobody else we've ever seen on planet Earth. This looks like a son of the gods. They're having a party in there. So let's go on. I see 4 men, he says. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, partly because the fires may be loud, partly because he doesn't want to get any closer. And he shouts, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego came out of the fire. Why didn't he invite that 4th one too? We don't know. But this is what happened here. He's saying, wait a minute, obviously there's something here beyond what I could command. Come on out, it's okay, your punishment's over. And so they're going to come out of the fire. So they didn't just come out towards the king, but we have here in verse 27, the satraps, prefects, governors, royal advisors crowded around them. Notice the evidence here now. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies. There was not a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Right? And so they were bound, but the ropes are gone. How are the ropes burned off, but their clothes aren't even burned at all? Their hair isn't singed. And if you've been close to a fire, you know that you can get your hair singed just by the barbecue grill, can't it? And I know that when I come back from camping or being out at a campfire somewhere, my wife says, oh, go wash your hair, because I smell of the fire from just a few minutes being around the smoke of a campfire. These guys are in a blazing furnace, and there isn't even a smell of fire on them. Miraculous. They were in the fire, but they weren't in the fire. Or the fire, at least, had no power over them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. He just changed his religion again. their God who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and, I like this part, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're all going to die. We got this one life. The question will be, what will you trade your life for if you get the choice? If you're just going to die a coward's death, or you're going to say, no, I want to live my life for my God. I'm willing to give up my life for what I believe in. We have brothers and sisters in Christ who that's happening to every day. And it doesn't seem to be happening in America very much, but the day could come when we too have to decide, am I going to stand up for my faith regardless of the opposition and danger involved, or will I not? But here we are, willing to give up our lives for our faith. That was what their story was, and that should be ours as well. So here's the king's conclusion. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego be cut to pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego in the province of Babylon. They had a position, now they're getting promoted again. Why? Because their God really is a God, unlike his statue or anything else that Nebuchadnezzar could worship. Remember, his name suggested he was a worshiper of a god named Nebu. Well, Nebu doesn't do this either. Neither can Nebuchadnezzar, neither can any of the other gods or this statue. But their God can save in this way. And that means our God can. And we need to stay faithful to him no matter what. Whether he rescues me or not, that should be our attitude. I'm going to stay faithful to the end. We will all face times of fiery furnaces. Maybe it won't have some kind of temperature problem like a furnace, but there'll be challenges to us and to our lives. What will happen to me now? What will happen to my finances or my job or my friendships, whatever? Will we cave on our faith, or will we be found faithful? I remind you here this day, we've been close to Memorial Day, I'm thinking of a hero, if you will, from the Revolutionary War, name of Nathan Hale. Famous young man, 21 years old, when he gets captured by the British, spying for General Washington. And immediately they're going to want to hang him. And one of the British officers present for the hanging recorded Nathan Hale's last words. I regret that I have but one life to lose for my country. I would like to suggest we kind of rewrite that in terms of the scripture we have today and be thinking, you'll never regret living your one life to the glory of your God. Make sure you do that, because this is who deserves our life. He gave his for us. Let's give ours back for him. God bless you. Thanks for listening.